But otherwise, let's introduce our next speaker, my friend and coworker, Mike Tetto.
Hopefully we stay off the green screen.
There you go. All right, and he's going to be talking on operational technology, cybersecurity, and defending the grid. So Mike, take it away.
All right. OT cybersecurity, defending the grid, but it sounds amazing. I tried to think of how to spice these slides up. I don't know if you guys, there's a South Park episode where they try to make school news a lot more exciting, and I was like, that's inappropriate. I'm not doing that. All right. Well, we've got a half hour, a little bit less, so we'll try to rip through this. We're just going to be doing a little skim off the top here. We're a quick intro, if you will. All right. What is OT? Operational technology. Purdue model. Not going to be quizzed on it, but we'll go through that real quick. What we do. Some basics of what we do and how we approach protecting our electric and gas systems, and some of our challenges. Details of my life are quite inconsequential. I'm Mike Tetto. I'm OT cybersecurity manager at Eversource. My power goes out. I don't get discounts. Sorry, and I'm sorry. So, last year I was able to participate. Department of Energy had started a program a couple of years ago called the OT Defender Fellowship. So that was pretty neat. Got to have a number of sessions with other OT security, peers throughout various, energy sector entities. Got to meet with every three-letter agency. No surprise, they all figure they're in charge if something goes wrong, and everyone's kind of pointing at each other like this. Yeah, but that's government. So we got to figure stuff out on our own. Been doing this for a while, from networking, coding, audit, compliance, security. Raised in Connecticut, so hit insurance, hit defense, now in the utilities. I don't know if there's another one to add to the list for the Connecticut bingo card. Yes. Yeah. Right. So, all right. So we're just gonna jump on in. What is operational technology? So, until I got to Eversource, right, this wasn't really my primary. So I'm coming at it from more traditional IT and IT security background, right? But been in here for 4 years now. Know enough to be dangerous. Know enough that we've done some good things, and we have some things that we still need to work on, right? But at the end of the day, right, operational technology, it's the technology that controls physical processes, and very often that comes along with some life and safety impact. So, on a small scale, your thermostat, your smart thermostat, right? That's an OT device, right? That's you're interacting with that thing and you're controlling the heat in your house. I think there was a good Mr. Robot episode on hacking the temperature controls and erasing the backup tapes, but it's been a while and I bailed on that show. But anyway. So we really need to evaluate things through that lens. Like, we're controlling physical processes here, and there is life and safety impact. So what's the worst that can happen? Well, pretty bad. Death. We don't want that. We know there's the kind of traditional CIA triad, and so we all love our confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Kind of, up until getting here was like, oh, they're kind of like three equal legs on a stool. Well, change that slightly now in the operational environment, and really it's safety. So this is all wrapped up in safety, and number one, one is safety, 1A is availability. So these systems have to work. They have to run. Not that I don't care about confidentiality and integrity. They're important, just a little less so, and to the effect that, how do they impact availability and safety? All right, so at the top, it really kind of looks like IT. Just, you've got your servers, you've got your workstations. we've got our switches and firewalls. So like within our control centers, I mean, we're running pretty, off the shelf stuff, right? Some custom software, but to run the grid or what have you, but otherwise it's stuff that we're familiar with and stuff that we know how to interact with. So, we're going to install our endpoint protection tools on there. We're going to collect all the logs. We're going to, do all the things that we normally do with IT infrastructure. So within our data centers, within our control centers, high degree of visibility, because that's stuff that we know and love and know how to interact with, know how to protect. And then as we leave our data center walls, right, and now we're starting to talk out to equipment that's on pole tops, we're talking to equipment out at substations, wherever else. We're converting to serial, we're stripping protocols, we're no longer doing IP communications, we might be doing radio. We've got devices out at substations, right? So RTUs, remote terminal units, HMIs, human machine interfaces, PLCs, programmable logic controllers, radios, relays. These are no longer IT devices. We're not in Kansas anymore. So we are not installing CrowdStrike on those things. We are not, really interacting with them very much at all. They have a job to do, and they have to, keep the safe, reliable flow of electricity throughout New England. So it gets to be a little bit more challenging. We have a lot less visibility down at that level. Not no visibility, but less. There's a particular device that I know that we've tested. We've run Nmat scans, and boy, we get to port 20,000. I know that device is going to topple over, and there's no coming back from it unless you do a hard reset of it, right? So we're not doing that. A lot of these devices, right, they're long lifetime devices. So they were probably designed 10, 20 years ago. They have, they're doing their job. They're a protective relay. They're doing what they're supposed to do, right? So when these things were designed and the protocols were written that this is all running on, security wasn't even a consideration, right? Or if it was a very minimal consideration. That's changing. That has changed over time. Equipment manufacturers, product manufacturers, they've gotten the memo, right? That it is critical infrastructure that this stuff have security. But it's not like that server that's getting refreshed every few years, or your workstation that's getting right. This might take 10, 20 years before that device is touched. Firmware updates, boy, there better be a darn good reason to touch that thing and update the firmware on it. Because again, this stuff, if it's working, it's like, don't touch it, right? So in the operational technology, like OT cybersecurity, so there's references to what's called the Purdue model. Again, the details of this, not terribly important, but at a high level, when I saw this, it kind of was like, oh, okay, I kind of get where it's going in terms of we've got network segmentation here, right? We've got layers of networking here, and trying to segment and kind of filter as you go, work your way down through the level. So, the exact device names, not terribly important, but towards the top, I added the 2 boxes about cloud and DMZ area, right? But enterprise, corporate network, your email, your HR, your business functions, right? That's kind of happening at the level 5, level 4, right? Now we're going to start to cross over into the OT space. And we've got this OT DMZ layer in the middle. Sometimes they refer to it, level 3.5, but now we're starting to cross over, right? And we're trying to separate what we do from an operational perspective from anything that's going on in the corporate network, right? And then further down from the DMZ, right? Now we're getting into what would be the SCADA or the control center aspects, right? And even there's lots more of isolation. I don't think I mentioned it later, but boy, do we love firewalls. We got a lot of them. We do high degrees of network segmentation for very good reason, to keep all that stuff away from malicious activity and away from the internet. Let's say you have an issue, whatever, Log4j, you get popped in your DMZ. What are we going to do? we're gonna cut that thing off, right? We're gonna protect our corporate network. Let's say we got ransomware running around our enterprise or our corporate network. Well, I'm prepared and we have plans ready to go in place that we're gonna cut off all the SCADA and operational stuff, and we're gonna run in an island mode, and we are not going to talk at all with our corporate network, right? Now maybe that OT DMZ layer gets popped, right? I hope not. That's gonna be a bad day, but we can still pull the ripcord and really isolate and at the control center level, right? And so we're gonna come back to the idea in a minute of defensible architecture. That's, if there's one takeaway from this, it's not that it's called the Purdue model, but that's kind of our approach to defensible architecture here, right? I will never promise that there's an air gap. There is no air gap. The air gap's a myth. There's very valid reasons for things to either traverse down or up. From a trust perspective, our most critical area, like our most trusted stuff, is at the bottom. And so I'll typically say, like, the corporate network is our internet from an OT perspective, right? So we don't trust the corporate network. So I want as few connections originating from the corporate network into the OT as possible. I'm not going to say it's zero, but there's a need, business need, and just to operate things I'll say for data to move up, right? And so data that starts at a sensor that's monitoring a piece of equipment at a substation. The information about that sensor, and hopefully it's accurate information, and don't have time on how to get ways and means to mess with a lot of that stuff, but it can be messed with, but it's hard. Right, we need to get data going up, right? So I don't know if anyone's ever heard of data diodes. They enforce one-way data communications. That's something that we're looking at, and I think is going to give us some, again, not going to be an air gap, but give us some ways to move data up the chain in a one-way fashion without introducing network connectivity from the north side. I know you had a couple of card slides in there, so happy to see that, right? This is what we are trying to do. And a lot of our architecture and philosophy, right? If there's something happening at our corporate network, Colonial Pipeline, right? They got hit with ransomware a few years ago, right? We need to be prepared to fully separate, and the lights need to stay on, and hopefully with no interruption whatsoever, right? We're pretty darn close to being able to do that with no interruption. I'll say the lights won't go out if we ever have to do that, but we might have to drive into the office for a couple of things, but we're getting pretty close to the point where it's like, we're going to be able to run indefinitely in this mode if we have to, right? I hope we don't have to, but that's why Roman and his team do good work. So, all right, there we go. All right, so some of the things that we talked about defensible architecture. So I think so. First of all, don't panic, right? And my predecessor was, said, he's like, a lot of the stuff in this space is like a lot of wax on, wax off, right? It's a boring environment, and I want it to be a boring environment, and I hope it stays a boring environment, right? So but there's a lot of attention to detail. So we talked about the defensible architecture, and that's very core to our approach there. Secure what you can. So, right, I'm not going to be able to bolt on security onto a device that was never meant to have it, but there's still things that you can do, and you can really just make it as hard as possible. So, starting at that more IT infrastructure of the OT and the control centers and whatnot, right? It wasn't that long ago that patches were maybe a couple times a year, right? It took a while. It took effort. Really what this comes down to is there's no magic bullet. It's hard work, right? So we worked very closely with the SCADA teams, right, to prove that we can do vulnerability scans and the machine's not going to topple over, There's still this kind of legacy perception that if you give a machine a sideways glance, it's going to fall over, right? So we spent close to a year testing and validating in non-production environments that, we can scan this stuff, we can do it safely, we can get accurate vulnerability data, and by the way, we can deploy at a minimum the Microsoft monthly patches on a monthly cadence, right? So we're very up to date on that stuff, right? At the control center level, right? We're not running legacy OSs at the control center level. We keep things up to date, right? Secure what you can. That gets harder the further you go down the layers into the more specialized equipment. But even then, right? Or TFM, like you get to know the equipment a little bit and what it's capable of. And if you can get some security out of it, that's better than no security, right? I think everyone's heard know your assets, right? We take that very, very seriously. So, and again, we know our assets to a high degree of fidelity at the control center level. One of the challenges is that it's harder to know what the assets are, out in the field. But, for example, at the control center, and part of it's because of how heavily regulated our environment is, but I just consider it good security. We know for any of our servers and workstations in these environments, we have established baseline configurations of the installed applications, the ports, the services, the users, right? At a minimum. And so for any of those servers and workstations, for our switches, for our firewalls, right? We have a focus, we get reports every day that'll say what's changed on those assets. So if there's a program that, whatever, Adobe went to the latest version, or, whatever the case may be, the latest Microsoft patch, my team gets reports daily and we investigate that and we tie it back to an authorized change control, something that was tested and approved in a non-prod environment. 99 times out of 100, that all checks out, right? Oh, this change is because of this CO and this was authorized, this was tested, we're good, right? One time out of 100, somebody goofed, made a mistake. So far, we haven't seen that something malicious has been going on, right? But that's part of why we do that as well, right? If all of a sudden port 80 starts listening on an asset that has no business listening on port 80, we're gonna be all over that, right? That gets harder the more specialized the device gets. So honestly, one of our challenges is, I'm laughing because Mike's heard me say this a ton of times, I need to know the make, model, and firmware of the thing on the other end. Great, I know the thing in the control center, we know it's patched, we know we're protected from the north side of that diagram, but I need to know the make, model, and firmware of the thing on the other end. At least once a month, our CISO will be like, hey, Mike, was reading on bleeping computer or whatever, we got CVE 2023-1234, and it affects Schweitzer electric relays. What's our exposure? I'm like, well, I don't really know. And that's not a great answer, by the way. We have we have databases, we have substation engineers and folks that their job, part of their job responsibilities is to go out and manually touch and interrogate these devices once a year and update that access database somewhere once a year. That's not good enough. I'll check it, that's the best I have at the moment. But one of the big challenges that, as long as I've been here, and I think it's getting closer to, we're looking at a few options for how we get that make, model, and firmware of that relay, of that HMI, that PLC. Some tools are in the marketplace now where that's becoming an option. And that's kind of that's what I'm going to be able to help answer that question. I'm going to be able to assess risk. I'm going to be able to say, yes, we have that device, no, we don't. And then kind of feeds into the next one, right? What's the exploit path? So this device at a substation that's, fenced off, multiple, badge readers, pin codes, if the exploit is one that you have to do standing in front of the device, okay, I mean, it might be a 10 out of 10, it might be really bad, but like, you know, we've got gates and, well, no guns, but, you know, cameras and right, we take physical security very seriously. Like, if the only way to exploit that is by standing in front of that device or physically being present on the same network segment, right? We've got some compensating controls there. So, you know, being able to know what those assets are they affected by a particular CVE? What are the details of that so that we know, hey, okay, yeah, we do have it, but I'm not as concerned, or we have it, and oh, by the way, like, yes, it can be remotely exploited, you know, from a presence, you know, in our control center, then we're going to take that much more seriously, right? Our plans and drills. So, my perspective has been that, you know, me, Mike Tetto, I am not going to personally prevent, you know, Russia, China, North Korea, you name it, you know, from breaking into the grid, if you will. But we're going to make it a lot harder. So kind of like, you know, if you and your buddy running away from a bear, just, you know, don't be the slowest one, right? We're not the slowest one, so that's good. You know, so, I lost my train of thought on that. Oh, well, it was a good analogy. Oh yeah, right. So make it harder, of course, right? But I'm not going to necessarily be able to prevent that, but I'm pretty confident that we're going to be able to detect it, right? Because of the attention to detail that we very high attention to detail to any changes, the level that we pay attention to our systems. I feel there's a good chance that we'd be able to, you know, detect it, right? If we can't prevent it, I think we can detect it. And then if we detect it, right, how are we going to recover from it? Been able to, you know, there have been a variety of exercises. One sponsored by the Connecticut National Guard called CYBERSECURITY. Really nice event that they put on where it's a red team, blue team event. They set up a you know, virtual SCADA system, and you know, the National Guard members are trying to penetrate a SCADA system. I think this year was a water plant, but you know, so my team was able to participate in that, and a lot of other utilities and other entities in the region. Like I said, it day to day it's quiet, but events like that are invaluable because now they can actually get to see and like, okay, this is happening for real on these systems. How am I going to respond? How am I going to, you know, what am I going to do in that scenario? There's another one coming up, not next week, the following week, sponsored by DOE out on Plum Island in New York and on Long Island. Similar in concept, except they actually have 3 isolated substations on the island. And so going to be doing live action drills on substations in a couple weeks. And my team will be helping, you know, defend against that. So that's really important. We don't have a good way to mimic that or replicate that on our internal system. So, you know, finding ways to get folks, you know, used to responding to and seeing that data is really, really important. You know, getting that as important as having, you know, incident response plans and drills that you keep up to date. That, you know, we do tabletop exercises regularly. Those are valuable too. But the real hands-on stuff, those type of exercises that we can get the team to, that's so invaluable. And think like an engineer, right? Like these devices have a purpose. What is that purpose? Get to know, you know, what is it capable of? And not just think like an engineer, talk to an engineer, right? The folks that have been living and breathing and working on these things for 20, 30 years. Very nice woman that we work with that, you know, we took time to go visit her in the lab that she's working in. And, you know, she works on a lot of our distribution SCADA equipment. We chatted for like all afternoon, like way longer than we planned to. Like just the fact that like we reached out and just said, hey, we'd like to understand what you do day to day was huge. And now we have a personal connection. And it's like, we're not coming in to be like, hey, we're going to tell you how to do IT security and this stuff that was never designed for it. It's like, we want to understand what you do, right? And that what makes a huge difference, you know, with this, you know, these people that have been a lot of people have been spending their lives operating this equipment, right? there has to be a little bit of understanding, a little bit of humility in how you approach it. And if you can make that personal connection with these people, like that is invaluable. So that was a real quick rip through OT cybersecurity and some of the things that we do with defending the grid. But I know I am standing in the way of lunch.
Yeah, you have questions?
All right, so questions.
Any like strategies for like confidentiality? You mentioned you kind of think about availability top priority, but in terms of encrypting any Modbus or anything like that?
So confidentiality, can we do anything for confidentiality? Sometimes, and it depends. Not great. Certain protocols have evolved over time to be able to support things like encryption. Some of the devices, especially the older ones, probably don't have processing capability, right? So the newer stuff at least supports it and is capable of it, right? And so where can we leverage it smartly without breaking things is the trick. No magic bullet, unfortunately, but especially the older equipment that doesn't have like the RAM or processing to be able to do computationally heavy like encryption, like kind of limited. Yeah. But then secure the network, right? If we can't encrypt it, like we're doing private connections. Now, sometimes we have radio, right? There's only so much that we can do to like stop replay attacks and things of that nature. We try to make it as private as possible, but it's do the best you can with what we've got.
Address the Johnson control ransomware and how you look at the side channels and what you do after you're alerted, how you prep, how you react to it.
So question was about Johnson Controls. They got hit with ransomware this week. They're I don't know if they're the leading vendor, but they're up there in terms of building management systems, right? So your HVAC and what have you. Just from our perspective, our primary focus was like, okay, let's make sure that we don't have any remote access to any of these, this equipment that Johnson Controls has no ability to remotely access any of our stuff. And so that was our first kind of mitigation step. Right. I think building management systems are like a kind of its own sort of category of OT things, but they're in every building, right? And right, again, that Mr. Robot episode where they turned up the heat to destroy the backup tapes or something, like that can happen. Like it can absolutely happen. So they're going to be having a really bad few weeks at Johnson Controls. But at a minimum, it was just, let's make sure that we're protected and there's no remote access.
I would assume you like increase monitoring, you try and look at logs more. What's some of the processes that you go to that are kind of reaction mode to an event like that?
Without getting too far into the building management system stuff on its own, I mentioned some of the challenges with getting to know our devices at like the electric and gas and SCADA, right? It's 10 times worse in the building management. Like we have individual facilities groups that manage individual buildings that all have different equipment, that all have different, systems that interact with the equipment. Ooh, I hear you. Getting a complete inventory or knowing what the real, how many Johnson Controls devices we have, I don't have like a repository to necessarily go to quickly or accurately assess that, and that's a real challenge. So, Roman, tell me to stop whenever.
You're good. Yeah, 5 minutes.
My question is actually just around that, right? You've got a bunch of devices, a bunch of OT devices all over the place. Do any of the newer specs or any of the org groups, are they pushing towards any kind of automated inventory management? Right, because it seems like that would solve a lot of, or at least part of the problem, right? Are we impacted problem?
I haven't heard of that. Not that equipment manufacturers haven't made strides, and I think the more that it gets attention from like the White House and various executive orders, like calling attention to part of the national cybersecurity strategy and saying, hey, this is critical, right? there's been calls for, improvements, but I love the idea that you have, right? I don't know that, I haven't heard of anything like that being suggested, right? I think not unilaterally, but device manufacturers will generally resist security because it's, I'm not gonna be able to sell it from where or it's gonna take me 6 more months to get to market if I have to bolt on security to this thing. So it's a challenge from that perspective, but I look at it as like, well, if you have security now, it's a competitive advantage, but I don't know that everyone necessarily sees it that way. We didn't even touch on any hardware bill of materials or software bill of materials stuff. That's a huge risk that's running throughout every piece of equipment too. So, yeah.
Do you guys have any recommendations for technologies that can be used for like monitoring OT environments and OT? I know it's like usually like wacky protocols like CIP or Modbus or something that might not be as easy to.
There's more and more products these days that are protocol aware and able to dissect those protocols. Dragos is a big one in the space, but I think Nozomi, Clarity, Tenable OT, they don't 100% overlap in terms of capabilities, but you'll hear those 4 quite a bit in terms of being able to monitor things in the OT space. There are some products that are coming to market where I said, I keep going back to that make, model, firmware, the thing on the other end. There are some that are coming out that can safely and in a protocol native way say, I just want you to tell me what you are, right? And we'd still have to go through the testing and validation process with our engineering groups and prove that we can do no harm, right? But there are starting to become things that, because actually asking the thing on the other end has been taboo forever, right? So, but now it's starting to change a little bit. Products are starting to become capable of it, but now we're going to need to test and validate and make sure that, that thing is not going to do harm, right? And I think if you could take some of the monitoring capabilities with knowing what the thing is on the other end, I haven't seen one product that does it all end to end, at least not yet. But if you can if you can fill those 2 gaps, then you're in a really good position, I think. Okay. I know that's.